What's up guys, I'm Mel here back in the studio. A little over a year ago, my track Close to Me was premiered by Afrojack at Ultra Miami, and today I'm going to show you how I made it. Alright, well, first things first, you guys might notice that this is not my normal studio. Today, we are actually in one of the studios at Wall Recordings, which is super sick. I'm over here in Belgium for the next couple weeks. So I'm very busy. I've been working on a lot of my own original music, and that's part of the reason why I haven't been posting on YouTube lately. I got a lot of original stuff in the works, but I wanted to squeeze in a YouTube video, and I've been super excited to show you guys this one. I really love this track. I released this track earlier this year on my new record label, Manitou Records. It was my first release on the record label, and I think you guys are just as stoked on it as I am. Hopefully you are. Anyway, this track has been a long time in the making. I started the very first version of it, I think almost 3 years ago, which is kind of crazy to say. I actually have that very version open here right now. So before we jump into the main project, that is basically the final version, I wanted to show you the very first version, show you some things that have changed, show you some things that have remained the same. So without further ado, let's jump in and take a look at this very first version. All right, you guys, well, there is the very first version. There's a lot of it that actually stayed the same in the final version, and also there's a lot of it that I ended up changing, some samples. You could also hear a lot of the sound design is just pretty basic and shitty, and then there's that one part of the melody which is just horrible, and I ended up switching. So anyway, that's the very first version that I created. Now let's jump over to the very final project, which is a project that you hear on Spotify, YouTube, all that stuff, and we'll take a look at how I created the track. So I'll go into everything in more detail, but first I just want to explain a little bit how I kind of created the track. With almost all of my tracks, I usually start with a melody. Sometimes I'll start with a chord progression, but this track was a little bit different. In fact, I don't start many tracks like this. The way I started this track was actually, I basically started creating an extended mix. So I went down here and essentially I started with my kick and clap and shakers and just kind of built out the drums. Had a loop pretty similar to that. Obviously, some of the samples were older. I had those samples in the project you just heard. I also had a couple really minimal melodic elements like this. But that was pretty much the project for, I want to say, maybe 3 or 4 months. I just created this new loop, had just downloaded a sample pack, so I was just kind of messing around with some of these new samples, but I really didn't have any idea of where I wanted the track to go. So finally, I opened the project back up. I wasn't very inspired, but I just kind of sat down and started writing out melodies. One thing I always like to do, and I've done this a couple times, but usually it's not very successful, is that I'll think about a track in terms of, imagine the build-up, and you get to the very end of the build-up, and you have a fill, a drop fill, and then what is the most epic thing that can happen after that drop, right? As soon as the first kick hits, what's the most epic thing? Of course, that only works if you're doing a club track, but in this case, this is a club track. So I was thinking to myself, what's the craziest thing I can do? And one thing that came to mind is I've always loved that sound that Brooks has in his remix of the Sia song. The remix that he did of Dusk Till Dawn, it's that super gritty saw, and it has a tape stop and then that pitch bend, and just that pitch bend like sliding up. To me, that's one of the craziest things. Totally crazy sound. So eventually I decided that I was gonna try to do that. So I laid down this part right here. And I pretty quickly opened Silent 1, made some presets, made that, and I was really happy with that, but I still had no idea where I wanted it to go. So I kept messing around. I think I tried a couple different variations, but eventually I settled on this, where it kind of does this little repetition here. And then, like you heard in the first version, I had no idea what I was going to do with the second part. In fact, I had that second part that you heard in the earlier version, which in my opinion was honestly just really shit. And so that was the part that was a bit trickier for me to figure out. It took many revisions. I actually had some later revisions that still had the final rhythm, but it was different notes and it still sounded pretty bad. So I just messed around, but eventually I came up with this melody, and I was finally happy with how it sounded. Now, as far as the overall sound of the track, the drop, the break, pretty much everything, I pretty much just went ahead and did all the sound design from scratch. A lot of Silent 1, some Serum presets as well, but it's really overall a pretty simple sound. You'll see as I go through each of these sounds, it's just a lot of saws, a lot of distortion, and a good bit of white noise as well. So even though we're talking about the drop now, I'm actually going to start from the break just so we can kind of work through the song chronologically. So I'll shut up now, and without further ado, let's check out all the details of this track. Now for me, like I said, this track was all about energy. So I had already created the drop and I knew that was super energetic, and so I kind of wanted to keep the same sort of vibe for the rest of the track. So when I created these break chords, I wanted chords that kept switching up pretty frequently. So I created this chord progression that's always constantly changing, and I also just wanted to drop right in. So in this very first section, right when it comes in, obviously there's not technically like a melody playing. The break pluck comes in a bit later, but already the chords are there and the whole vibe is there. This is playing on, I think, 2 different presets. The first one is actually FL Keys, just a stock plugin for FL Studio. This is basically the Rhodes preset that comes on it, and I just tweaked it a little bit. This is actually the preset I created for my remake of Like I Do. Not a lot of processing on here. I just have a little bit of distortion, which gives it that grittiness. If I took it off, like I said, I just wanted to keep the energy kind of crazy for this track, and so a lot of these sounds, including the chords, have distortion on them. This is the second sound I just layered. So I don't actually have anything in Serum itself, but on the mixer track I have this, which is distorting it, and then I also have Camel Crusher, which is distorting it a little more as well. Below that main synth, I have some guitar ambience. I think I actually recorded this. It's been so long that I kind of forget, but I think I just recorded this on an acoustic guitar I had. So I tried to kind of do this like plucky thing where I opened it up and did like a bit more plucky and then a bit more sustained, but as you can see, I just ended up chopping it up. So I did that with 1 take, and then I did that with a second take here. And then just to keep it interesting, I added this kind of LFO automation here. I put an LFO on and kind of automated that panning from side to side. It's pretty subtle. You probably don't even notice it when the whole track is playing, but yeah, those 2 are just playing, kind of fill up the ambience. Down at the bottom here, I have some more ambience. This is kind of like some plucky sort of chopped up stuff. It sounds like this. It's a couple different layers, all pretty simple stuff, but this is really kind of what sets the bed for the track. And as you can see, it's very repetitive. This goes pretty much throughout the whole track except for the drop, and then it cuts out, and then in the second break it comes back in. So that's just going through the whole thing, kind of staying on the root note of the track. Finally, down at the bottom of the instruments, we have this, which is a bass. Super simple sound. I just created it from scratch in Serum. It's literally just 1 oscillator, has 8 voices, and a tiny bit of distortion, cutting off some of the high end, but it's a super simple sound overall. For our drums, it's pretty simple, but what you'll notice here is that everything is switching up super quickly. So right here is the first, this is where the track is starting, but already halfway through this one pattern, we have some snaps coming in. Keeping with that theme of just energy for this whole track, I have things constantly changing. So normally what I would do is I might have this whole section that would be the same, like pretty similar drums. but I already have these snaps coming in, and then we have a fill, and then we have more drums, and you can see lots of different risers, downlifters, all that sort of stuff. So it's really not too complicated, but I just wanted to have everything switch up, switch up, switch up, and nothing stay the same, just so it really keeps it interesting. This is where the melody starts playing, or the chords rather. Already snaps are coming in. All these little fills. And already a riser coming in. And now we get to the build. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We still have this section to come to. This is the sort of second section. This is where the melody comes in, and it sounds like this. Also up here, I just reversed, I basically bounced out some of this audio and reversed it, so lets you know that the melody is coming. This is also with two presets. One is this one. This is actually, it might be slightly modified, but this is from my sound bank. And then to add on top of that, this is a sample I grabbed from this sample pack. I don't know if it's like a vocal sample or something. It sounds kind of vocally to me. It just adds some texture on top of it. Below that, we have pretty much the same exact chords. I think it's just a different pattern because it does like one different chord at the end. You can see I have some of these automations. This is the cutoff. Down here we have some kind of plucky, I think they're like eighth notes, just like kind of making sure the energy keeps flowing along. Super simple saw chords, but something about that just like kind of cut off saw, it's hard to beat. I use it in a lot of tracks, a lot of people use it in a lot of tracks, and it just sounds good. We have, I think it's the same bass here. Oh, no, it's not. I think it's the same pattern, but it's now I put it on the sub bass. So this is just adding like some proper low end. And then above that, I have this, which is kind of following along with those eighth notes from the chords. A little gritty, kind of distorted with that white noise. And so all together, I'm just gonna mute the drums and you can hear how much energy this is just bringing in with that kind of da 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 da. Okay, so we've added some extra drums to keep the energy going, basically match the same energy that the new instruments make. We have this little clock here. We have a little kick going on. Some claps and rides and little fills. Down here we have some downlifters, crashes, and then it brings us into the next section, which is the build-up. So as you probably know by now, the build-up is a section where we're sort of transitioning from the lower energy of the break and bringing it all the way up to the super high energy of the drop. Typically, what I like to do, and this is very typical in dance music, is start introducing the melody so your listener is kind of familiar with it. So that's what I did here. And then for this, it changes up a bit and it just kind of stays on one note and gets repetitive. Stays on the same chord, and then the drop comes. Down here, you can see I had at one point left this break chords. It was just unnecessary. I added these drop chords in and was filtering those in as well. And so there's just too many overlapping frequencies, so I just muted this pattern out. So this is the new chords. These are the chords, they're the same chords that are in the drop, it's just slightly different pattern. You can hear they're really distorted. Of course it opens up in the drop and you can really hear that distortion nicely, but yeah, it's just building so much tension. These are the presets. I just have 3 layers, which isn't crazy. The first is, again, a preset from my sound bank, probably tweaked a little bit. The second one is also Silence. Again, another preset from my sound bank. And then this last one is actually just one I created from scratch. Just like a super distorted one. You can see I added a lot of feedback distortion, or fold back rather. I have the bass, which is this. In here, I have this little fill and the sub comes in. Basically what we're doing is in the break here, we have the sub, so it has all the low end, and then in the build, I cut out all the low end from the sub, and so I basically trade the sub for this super long like sub drop. It sounds like this. And then it gets halfway through, and then that's when the sub comes back in. And then the energy comes back up. And then I have an automation clip that's kind of cutting out the sub right before the drop. Now, one more very important thing, which is kind of part of the instruments as well. And this is something I didn't add till much later, but at some point I really liked how the build was going, but it was just missing some little element. And so that's when I came up with this little arpeggio here. It's a super simple sound. I just created it in Silence. It's just a couple voices of saw, slightly detuned, tiny bit of white noise, cutoff filter. Just has a little bit of reverb on it, a little bit of distortion. First, let me play it without. Let's just do the chords. It's cool, that's whatever. And then you add this in. It's like, I don't know, it's sneaky, again, it just like adds that extra little bit of spice to the track. And so I love that. You can see I have some drop claps. This is just basically filling up the space, kind of complementing the snare. Of course, I have the snare right here. This is just like kind of a clappy fill thing that goes along with these snares. So here's the snares alone. So that just adds like a little bit of kind of high end on top of those snares. Here, I have a little fill, risers and downlifters and all that stuff down here. I probably went overkill on all the effects, but it worked. And even more down here. So all together, I'll play the drums. One last thing that is really cool in this build is this right here. It's basically kind of this like, I'll call it a choir stack. It's just this really cool, like organic kind of vocal tone. I don't know, it's kind of this dissonant chord that just sucks you in right before the drop. It's actually super simple. All it is a reverse vocal sample. But it's just that, and then I just pitched it like 5 different times. And just pitched it into the chord. And then what I did on the bus here is you can hear I put this LFO tool, so as it's moving along, it kind of chops up the notes. I actually realized, you can see the effect is on here now, but when I opened up this project originally, this effect was off. So I think in the version that I released, I accidentally left this off. It doesn't make a huge difference anyway. Either way you hear it, it's probably about the same. I'm sure no one noticed, but yeah, technically this was supposed to be on and I think I fucked up. But that's okay, no one noticed. And without further ado, that brings us to the drop. So I've already kind of gone over how I created this drop. Again, it has this sort of A and then B section, and that's obviously defined by the rhythm and melodies of each section, but it's also kind of different sound design. If I just play these individually, you'll see that this first one sounds, it's similar, but it's definitely distinctly different kind of sound from the second. I just wanted to kind of have this separating thing. This first section, this sort of A melody, I wanted to just be super aggressive and like just in your face. And then the second one, I wanted to open up a little bit wider, have a bit more of a, it's still not like a gentle sound, but a bit less in your face than the first one. This first section is, looks like 4 layers here. The first one is in silent. It's super gritty, but again, it's also super simple. Literally just one voice of saw, a little bit of white noise, just one oscillator. And then the key to making this thing kind of as gritty as it is this pitch bend. So if I took this off, it still sounds good. You can still hear that kind of distorted saw, but adding this little pitch bend LFO makes it that extra bit crazy. And then all these other ones are just supporting layers. This is another one I created. Just a lot more detuned with some chorus on there. And I think these two are Serum. This is actually a preset from my sound bank as well. And kind of another super saw. And those just all sort of help widen up the lead and just make it sound a bit more interesting. Now you'll also see I have a lot of different automation clips. I forget, there are a couple of these that I forget exactly what they're doing. But the main ones here is this volume automation clip. So when the B leads come in, you can see these A leads kind of just drop out so they're not clashing with each other. I also have this pitch automation, which is just doing a couple tiny pitch bends. Most of the pitch bending is coming from the actual MIDI. You can see these notes are overlapping. And that just has the portamento on. But one is pretty important, this very last note. If I didn't have the pitch bending, it would sound like this. Yeah, it's pretty subtle, but it has this sweep up, kind of this, brings a note, pitches it up, and then it has this little vibrato on the end there too. I don't know what this is. I guess I didn't actually use it. I think I was gonna chop out some of the notes, but yeah, a few of these automation clips are, I think, completely unnecessary. Coming up to the second lead, let's take a look at these layers. So for the second lead, you can see I have a lot more layers here, and these are probably unnecessary, but it is what it is. This is actually, funny enough, a riser preset that I've created, also from my sound bank, but it just, I guess, had the kind of tone that I wanted, so I used that as a lead. This is in Serum. This is a preset that I've kind of created, sort of inspired by Velour. It's sort of this like squarey with the white noise on it. Just, again, I wanted to kind of just switch the characteristic of the second lead. This one is actually Nexus. And apparently it's not playing. Don't know about that. Down here we have another Serum. I don't know where this came from. This might have been from, yeah, I think this is from the same sample pack that I was getting some of these sounds from, the Sick Rate. This is just a super simple preset I created. Down below here we have a little vocal chop. And one more. Just kind of an octave to give that, yeah, to give that higher octave. And then finally down here, we have one more layer, which is just emphasizing a couple of these notes. So without it, with it. Moving on to the second half of the drop. This is where I added in a couple more layers. Basically what I did, I think I just kept the exact same presets, but I created a little harmony. I just bounced it out to audio because then it was just easier that way. But here is the harmony. And together with the lead, that sounds like this. It's not super loud in the mix, but it does just add that nice harmony, and yeah, it fills out more frequencies, makes it a little more interesting. Okay, so those are all the leads. Honestly, processing for these is super simple. I'm just cutting out the low end, just boosting a couple tiny frequencies, but very, very subtle. Again, here, super subtle. I could probably get away with not doing any of that. I have distortion, Camel Crusher, also adding more distortion. Essentially, it's just cutting out the low end, distortion, reverb, and that's it. Before we get to the chords, I have a couple really small samples here. This is just like a hey. Oh, no, I'm wrong. This is a hey. This is a sex noise that I like to use for a lot of my tracks. I don't know why I do this, but I found some of these on Splice a while ago, and yeah, I don't know. It's like somehow adds more emotion to the track in my opinion. So this is a sample that, yeah, I use in some of my tracks every now and again. This over here is another sample that I had put in. Fuck that. I took it out later because I realized it sounded kind of stupid, but funny enough, if you listen to this track that Afrojack played in his Ultra Miami set in 2023, he actually played a version that still had this in it in front of like 70,000 people. It's fuck that. And it sounds pretty stupid, but you live and you learn. So below all those, we have the chords, and now the filters opened up so you can hear all of their distorted glory. Again, we've already gone over these presets. It's the same ones. Some of them have distortion inside of the presets, and some of them, I think maybe did I add distortion here? Yeah, so I added Camel Crusher. So if I took Camel Crusher away, you can hear it's still a little bit distorted because some of the presets already have that in it, but this just makes it even grittier. Finally, down at the bottom, we have the basses, and they sound like this. All in all, the basses are actually pretty simple. It's just, there's a couple things in here, like this spot. It sounds like it's these crazy dubsteppy things, but it's fairly simple overall. But first, let's look at the main basses. These are just a couple presets. Honestly, not even that many. It's like 4 or 5. The first one is in Silent here. The second one is Serum. Third one. This is one I think I put it in later. It's super simple, basically like a super saw, just detuned bass. And then finally we have this, which is actually a bass shot. So it's just a sample. This is actually a sample. It's probably like 20 different basses all added up. This is a kind of one shot I exported from my remake of Like I Do, as you can see here. So it's a bunch of Serum and Silent presets layered on with growls and stuff. So I like doing that because then you basically have a sample that's been pre-processed and all that. Below here, of course, we have our sub. Really warm sounding sub. It's 2 oscillators of sine waves. One is 2 octaves down, the other is 1 octave down. I like adding the second octave. It just adds the basically octave up, and yeah, it helps make the sound a lot warmer. For processing, I pretty much cut out all the highs, and then I kind of added in the highs again by distorting it. And then up here, I don't have too many layers, honestly. Sometimes I'll go crazy and put in like 5 layers of growls and little one shots and stuff. But in this case, I pretty much just have, it does hit on almost every single note, but it's just a few samples that I chopped up. And then this one is fun. I have this here, kind of like a little reverse synth. This is the main one that's just super aggressive, and I added that up with a reverse. And then this is the other one that's pretty cool. So what I did here is this is sort of a little halfway through the drop fill, and I kind of layered this with some drums. The one shot itself it sounds like this. This kind of super disgusting bass. Yeah, it's already kind of interesting, but then what I did is I did this automation clip. So I did this sort of wavy thing and then chopped it up, and it sounds like this. To add to that, I layered this thing, and then 2 more little bass shots. And so in the full context of the track, it sounds like this. But that is sort of it for the bass line. Now, when it comes to making drums for a house track like this, you're sort of boxed in. Like, there's not a ton you can do that's super crazy. It's 4 to the floor, pretty much kick, clap, kick, clap. I did do something that's not super typical. Normally what you would do with a house track is you'd have the kicks and claps starting from the beginning. You usually have some effects and downlifters and stuff, but typically your rides and or hi-hats only come in halfway through the drop. And as you can see, I have rides coming in already on the first bar, and then on the second bar, I have hi-hats coming in. Not only that, but I also have a shaker that is going pretty much the entire drop. And so sticking with the theme of just making as much energy as possible as I could with this track, it really follows along with the melody. So take a listen to this by its own. All right, so we have da-da-ch, da-da-ch, kind of these offbeat rides. And then in the second bar, already we have the ns, ns, ns. And if I play that again and add the instruments back in, you can see it kind of creates that separation between the A lead and the B lead. It's subtle, it's not like something that's super crazy, but I just wanted to do everything in the track that I could to kind of differentiate. We have an A lead and then a B lead, and then it goes back to the A. So just switching it up a little bit and keeping that energy moving, going back and forth, this kind of push-pull thing. Down here we have some typical downlifters. I chopped this one up and changed some of the volumes just so it would go along with the rhythm of the melody. Here I have a little riser I made. Again, talking about sticking with the melody and making that the main focus. I literally just copied over the melody, rhythm and everything, and then I just, of course, put it on one note because it's a riser. But this is playing the exact same rhythm as the melody, but it works, and it just makes the lead even that much more powerful in a way. And I think finally there's one last thing which you might have just heard, and that is this thing. So again, we're keeping variations. It's pretty much the same fill that I showed you before with this little bass glitch and stuff. But to keep it interesting, I wanted to change it up a bit. And what I did with that is two things. The first thing is this. Not complicated, it's just this little sample, and I made it slightly more choppy by adding this volume automation so it just chops it up. But the thing below it is right here, and this is what's really interesting. This is a very weird thing, and to be honest, if I made this track again, I don't know if I would do the same thing. I don't know if I would remember how to do the same thing. But what I did is this. So this is actually a guitar plugin. You probably wouldn't have guessed, but let me jump in here and turn off the effects real quick. And so without effects, this sounds like this. Obviously the same rhythm, but other than that, it sounds totally different. What this is, basically an electric guitar. We're boosting some of the high end, we're distorting it, and then as soon as I add this plugin, now we have... So this is the main plugin that's making it do crazy stuff. This is just a stock FL Studio plugin. It's called Effector, and it has a bunch of different like really cool presets of, I mean, if I change it here, you can see. So yeah, just by changing this, it has a ton of different effects. What I did is I chose the lo-fi preset, which is, I think, essentially like a bit crusher. And so what you can do here is you can automate this parameter of basically where this sits. So here, I automated both the X and Y parameter. Take a look at, when I play this, take a look at these knobs. And then down here, I added this, and then I automated this panning. And so take a look at this one. So that one is on this automation clip, so it's basically panning from right to left super fast. And then on here, I added this, so that chops it up even more if I took this off. And and all together we just have this kind of like, yeah, little glitchy thing. Yeah, and it's just those kind of small details that add up, and you know, the little ear candy that kind of sets you apart as a producer. So in the second break, pretty much everything stays the same. There's not a ton different. Chords are all the same, builds back up into the drop. One thing I will go over very quickly is I added these vocals. Nothing crazy. Coming over. Just found it on Splice, but they're vocals that I really liked the sound of. Coming over, washing over me. And then I wanted to make them a little bit more interesting, and so what I did is I just made a separate, basically, yeah, bounced it out as a separate sample and did this. This is a super cool way of just making vocals a bit unique. It's a vocoder. It's literally just the stock vocodecs from FL Studio. If you want to know how to do that, there's plenty of tutorials on YouTube of how to set that up, and you're basically taking like a synthesizer and then the vocal and making them mush together. So that sounds really cool already. And then here I have the same thing, but now I have a bass playing instead of the chords, and so it's getting this like super gritty effect that you've probably heard before in some Brooks tracks. I've done it in a few of my tracks. And so you add that up with the vocal, and here you go. Coming closer, pull you close to me. Coming over, coming over, coming over, coming over, pull you close to me. And then it's back to the second drop, which is the same as the first drop. So there we have it, guys. I know it's been a bit of a longer video, so thank you so much for sticking around. But yeah, I just wanted to show you all the details of this track. This is a track, like I said, I've been working on it for a really long time. Overall, it's not a super complicated track. I made all the sounds pretty much, but yeah, it's just, I don't know. I think there's a couple cool little tricks and stuff in there that maybe I was able to teach you. Of course, if I missed anything, make sure to comment down below or send me a message on Instagram or whatever. Make sure to go stream the track. It's available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon. I don't even know all the platforms at this point, but it's available everywhere. You can find the extended mix on my YouTube channel as well as my SoundCloud. And most importantly, stay tuned for future YouTube videos, including my original music. I have a lot of original music coming out. Again, that's one of the reasons I've been so absent online, is because I've been focusing on working on getting stuff ready for releasing. I have a lot more future house stuff. I have a lot of progressive house stuff and a lot of collaborations. And yeah, it's a very exciting year. I'm super excited to share all my new music with you. So stay tuned for that. Again, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for the continued support. And in fact, we just hit 7,000 subscribers. So that's very exciting. It's another good milestone. I remember, it feels like yesterday when we were at, yeah, less than 2,000 subscribers. I just got into 1,000 and then we passed 2,000 and now we're at 7,000. So I think we can get to 10,000 this year. That's gonna be one of my goals. I know 10,000 is still not a ton, but it's a lot more than I used to have. And it's a lot more than I ever thought was possible just a few years ago. I'm excited to continue building this channel as I continue to grow as a producer and DJ and all that, and excited to bring you guys along. So thank you for the continued support. It's very late. I think it's almost 4 in the morning here at Wall HQ. I'm gonna go get some shut-eye and go work on some more original tracks in the morning. And okay, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.